Hi, I'm Linda. I'm 46 years old, and this is the story of how my daughter-in-law introduced me to her millionaire family as the broke freeloader we keep around out of pity, and how she discovered right in front of everyone that I was her own father's new boss. It was a Friday night when I arrived at the Whitmore Mansion in Brookline, Massachusetts. My son James had married Brianna Whitmore 2 years ago, and this was the first family dinner I'd been invited to. Yes, the first in 2 years. I tried not to think about it too much. James was happy, and that had always been enough for me. The house was imposing. White columns at the entrance, gardens that looked like they'd been pulled from a magazine, an iron gate that opened automatically when the taxi dropped me off. The driver whistled low as we pulled up. "Someplace," he muttered. I nodded, feeling my stomach tighten. I looked down at my navy blue dress, the best one I owned, bought at a clearance sale 3 years ago, and took a deep breath. The fabric was starting to pill slightly at the elbows. I'd tried to hide it with a cardigan. As I walked up the stone pathway, I noticed the perfectly manicured hedges, the fountain in the center of the circular driveway, the expensive cars parked near the garage, a Mercedes, a BMW, a Tesla. My taxi looked painfully out of place. Brianna greeted me at the door before I could even ring the bell. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a flawless bun, not a single strand out of place. She wore a beige linen dress that draped perfectly on her slim frame, probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her smile was polite but cold, like she was greeting a distant acquaintance she barely remembered. "Linda, so glad you could make it," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that wasn't exactly rude, but made it crystal clear my presence was a concession, not a desire. She glanced briefly at my dress, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Judgment? Pity? I couldn't tell. "Thank you for inviting me, Brianna," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The house is beautiful." "Oh, this old thing?" She laughed lightly. "My parents bought it ages ago. They've been talking about upgrading, actually. Maybe something in Newton or Wellesley." Upgrading from a mansion, of course. James appeared right behind her, and my heart immediately lifted. My boy. My 25-year-old son, with those bright blue eyes and that smile that could light up any room. He was wearing a crisp white shirt and dress pants, much more formal than I was used to seeing him. "Mom." He wrapped me in a tight hug, and for a moment, everything seemed worth it. For a moment, I forgot about the expensive cars and the perfect hedges and Brianna's cold smile. "You're gonna love meeting everyone. Come on in." He took my hand and led me inside. The foyer was massive, with marble floors that gleamed under an enormous chandelier. There was a grand staircase curving up to the second floor, oil paintings on the walls that looked like they belonged in a museum. I felt my worn shoes clicking awkwardly on the marble, each step announcing my presence. "Everyone's already in the dining room," James said excitedly. He seemed genuinely happy I was there, which made everything a bit easier to bear. "They've been asking about you." I doubted that very much, but I smiled at him anyway. The dining room was even more magnificent than I'd imagined. A long mahogany table that could easily seat 20 people, upholstered chairs that looked like antiques, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the backyard gardens. The crystal chandelier above the table was so elaborate it could have been in a palace. The table was set with china so delicate I was afraid to touch it, and there were more forks and spoons at each place setting than I'd ever seen in my life. There were about 15 guests already seated or standing around with cocktails. The women wore designer dresses and expensive jewelry. The men had on tailored suits. Everyone looked like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. I felt my cheeks warm with self-consciousness. James guided me to a seat near the middle of the table. I sat down carefully, smoothing my dress. A young woman next to me, one of Brianna's cousins, I assumed, gave me a quick, appraising look, and then turned back to her conversation without saying hello. Brianna took her place at one end of the table, near an older couple who I assumed were her parents. The woman had perfectly styled platinum blonde hair and wore a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my car. The man had distinguished gray hair and glasses perched on his nose. He was reading something on his phone and barely looked up when Brianna sat down. A server I hadn't even noticed came around with wine. I accepted a glass gratefully, hoping it might steady my nerves. Then Brianna stood up. She tapped her wine glass delicately with a spoon, and the gentle tinkling sound made everyone fall silent and turn their attention toward her. She had that kind of presence, the kind that came from growing up knowing the world would always listen when you spoke. "Everyone, before we start dinner, I want to introduce someone very special," she began. Her voice was sweet, almost syrupy. My heart warmed for just a second. Maybe I'd been wrong about her. Maybe she was genuinely trying to make me feel welcome, until she continued. "This is Linda, James's mother." She gestured toward me with her wine glass, and I felt every eye in the room turn to look at me. "She lives in Dorchester, in a very cozy little apartment. She doesn't have much, poor thing, but we've always made sure to help her out when she needs it. You know, buy her groceries sometimes, help with bills. She's kind of like a broke freeloader we keep around out of pity." She said it with a light laugh, as if it were a funny anecdote, as if she were sharing an amusing story about a stray cat they'd decided to feed. The laughter started immediately. It wasn't a loud, raucous laugh. It was that polite, contained chuckle from people who found something mildly amusing but didn't want to seem crass. A few people actually covered their mouths as they laughed. The sound of it filled my ears like static. I felt like I'd been slapped. My face burned hot. My hands, resting on the edge of the table, began to tremble. I gripped the tablecloth to steady them. The room suddenly felt too hot, too bright, too crowded. I couldn't breathe properly. I looked at James. He had gone completely pale, his mouth hanging open in shock. His eyes darted between me and Brianna, clearly not knowing what to do, what to say, how to fix this. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to walk out. I wanted to scream at Brianna that I had never, not once, asked them for money, that every bill in my apartment was paid with money I had earned or saved, that I didn't need their pity, but I couldn't move. I was frozen. That's when I noticed a man at the head of the table, gray hair, probably in his early 50s, with reading glasses perched on his nose. He wasn't laughing. In fact, he was staring at me with an expression of complete confusion, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. His brow was furrowed, his eyes narrowed. He leaned forward in his seat, adjusted his glasses as if he needed to see me more clearly. He tilted his head slightly, studying my face. And then he spoke, his voice cutting through the dying laughter like a blade through silk. "Wait a minute." He paused, squinting at me. "Aren't you my new boss?" The laughter stopped instantly. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, that I could hear the ticking of a clock somewhere in the house. Every single person at that table turned to look at him, then at me, then back at him. Brianna's smile froze on her face. "Let me take you back. Let me tell you how I got to that dining room, to that moment, to that silence." I was born in 1979 in Somerville, Massachusetts, in a small 2-bedroom apartment above a pizzeria. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce was so constant in our home that I didn't realize other people's houses smelled different until I was 7 years old. My father, Michael, was an electrician. He had rough, calloused hands and came home every night smelling like copper wire and hard work. My mother, Susan, worked at a laundromat on Main Street, standing on her feet 10 hours a day, folding other people's clothes and pretending she didn't notice when wealthy customers were rude to her. We didn't have luxury. We didn't have much of anything, really, but we had enough. We had food on the table every night, even if it was pasta 4 nights a week. We had heat in the winter, even if we had to wear sweaters indoors to keep the bills manageable. We had clothes, even if most of mine came from yard sales and thrift stores. But most importantly, we had books. My mother loved to read. She'd pick up novels from the library every week, thick paperbacks with worn covers and dog-eared pages. She read while she ate breakfast, while she waited for the bus during her lunch breaks, and she read to me every single night before bed, no matter how tired she was. "Linda," she told me when I was 8 years old, settling into the chair beside my bed with a copy of Little Women, "education is the one thing in this world that nobody can take away from you. Not poverty, not bad luck, not mean people. Once it's in your head, it's yours forever. You remember that?" I remembered. I studied like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. I knew, even as a child, that education was my ticket out, not out of loving my parents or my neighborhood, but out of the constant worry about money, out of the fear that one unexpected expense could destroy everything we'd built. I devoured books. I did every extra credit assignment my teachers offered. I stayed late after school to get help with subjects I struggled with. When other kids were outside playing, I was often at the kitchen table with my textbooks spread out, my mother sitting across from me doing her own reading while I worked. It paid off. In 8th grade, I took the entrance exam for Boston Latin School, one of the oldest and most prestigious public schools in the country. It was a long shot. Kids from families like mine didn't usually get in, but I studied for months, and when the acceptance letter came, my mother cried. Actually cried, standing right there in our tiny kitchen, holding that letter like it was made of gold. "You did it, baby," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. You really did it. Boston Latin was hard. Harder than anything I'd experienced. The other students came from wealthier families, had tutors, had parents who'd gone to college. I felt out of place for the entire first year, but I worked harder than anyone. I had to. I graduated near the top of my class. And then came the really big moment. I got accepted to Boston University with a partial scholarship. It wasn't a full ride. My parents still had to scrape together money for housing and books and food, but it was enough. It was possible. I entered Boston University in the fall of 1997, planning to major in pre-law. I was 18 years old, living in a dorm room the size of a closet, eating ramen noodles 4 nights a week, and I'd never been happier. I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to defend people who couldn't defend themselves. I was going to make a difference. My parents were so proud. My dad started telling everyone he met that his daughter was going to be a lawyer. A real lawyer, he'd say, beaming. At BU. But then, in the fall of my sophomore year, I met Tom Morrison. I was at a house party I almost didn't go to. My roommate had dragged me there, insisting I needed to have fun and meet people, instead of spending another Saturday night in the library. The party was crowded and loud, and I was about to leave when I literally bumped into him. Spilled my drink all over his shirt. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'd gasped, mortified, grabbing napkins and trying to help. He'd just laughed. It's fine. It's just a shirt. And honestly, it wasn't even a good shirt. Tom was 25, 3 years older than me. He worked as a maintenance technician for a company that managed commercial buildings downtown. He wasn't a college student, wasn't part of the university crowd. He'd grown up in Dorchester, started working right after high school to help support his mom after his dad left. He was handsome in a regular, approachable way. Brown hair, warm eyes, an easy smile. But more than that, he was kind and funny. And after years of academic pressure and stress and constant striving, being around Tom felt like taking a deep breath after being underwater too long. We started dating that October. He'd pick me up after classes in his beat-up Honda Civic, and we'd drive to the beach or get cheap Chinese food, or just sit in his car and talk for hours. He made me laugh. He made me feel like I didn't have to be perfect all the time. He made me feel like I could just be. My parents liked him well enough, though my mother had reservations. He's a nice boy, Linda, she said carefully one Sunday afternoon when I'd brought him home for dinner. But don't lose sight of your goals. Don't let a man derail your dreams. I've seen it happen too many times. I won't, Mom. I'd promised, and I'd meant it. Tom and I dated through my sophomore year, junior year, senior year. By the time graduation approached, we'd been together for over 3 years. We talked about the future constantly. I'd go to law school, or maybe start working at a firm as a paralegal while I studied for the bar. Tom would keep working, maybe get promoted to supervisor. We'd get a small apartment together, save money, build a life. The day I graduated from Boston University in May of 2002, with my bachelor's degree in legal studies, my parents sat in the audience crying. My dad kept taking pictures with his disposable camera, even though half of them would probably be blurry. Tom was there too, cheering louder than anyone when my name was called. That night, he proposed. We were at a park near the harbor, watching the sunset. He got down on one knee with a simple ring. Nothing fancy, but it was beautiful to me, and asked me to marry him. I know you're going to be this incredible lawyer, he said, his voice shaking slightly with nerves. I know you're going to do amazing things, and I just want to be by your side while you do them. Will you marry me, Linda? I said yes without hesitation. We got married that June, 2 weeks after graduation, at a small church in Somerville. My dress was borrowed from my cousin. We had the reception in the church basement with homemade food and a boombox for music. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. We were young, in love, and ready to take on the world. The plan was simple. I'd start applying for legal internships and entry-level positions at law firms while studying for the bar exam. Tom's income would cover our basic expenses. It would be tight, but we'd make it work. We'd both sacrifice a bit now to build our future. We got a small one-bedroom apartment in Dorchester. It wasn't much. The building was old, the plumbing was temperamental, and we could hear our neighbors through the walls, but it was ours. I set up a little study area in the corner of the living room with my law books and a desk I'd found at a thrift store. I started sending out resumes. I studied for the bar exam. Everything was going according to plan. And then, in September, 3 months after our wedding, I started feeling sick. At first, I thought it was stress, or maybe bad food. But when the nausea continued for 2 weeks straight and my period was late, I took a pregnancy test. It was positive. I stared at that little plastic stick in our cramped bathroom, watching the 2 pink lines appear, and felt my entire future shift. I was 23 years old, 3 months married, unemployed, and pregnant. When I told Tom, he was shocked. But then a huge smile spread across his face. "We're gonna have a baby?" he said, his voice full of wonder. "Linda, we're gonna be parents!" His joy was infectious. Within minutes, I was smiling too, crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, this wasn't the plan. Yes, the timing was terrible. But we were going to have a baby. Our baby. We told our families. Everyone was thrilled. My mother, especially, cried happy tears and immediately started knitting baby blankets. But I also saw the concern in her eyes when she looked at me. The unspoken question, "What about law school? What about your career?" "I'll figure it out, Mom," I told her. "Women have babies and careers all the time. I'll make it work." But as the pregnancy progressed, as my body changed and the exhaustion set in, the reality of the situation became clearer. I still sent out resumes, but now employers could see I was pregnant. The interviews dried up. The rejection letters piled up, and the bar exam I'd planned to take. I was too tired, too overwhelmed to study properly. I postponed it. "I'll take it after the baby comes," I told Tom, when things settled down. James Michael Morrison was born on December 15, 2002, at 3:47 in the morning. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, blue eyes, a tiny tuft of brown hair. Perfect. When they placed him in my arms for the first time, when I looked down at his tiny, scrunched-up face, I felt a love so overwhelming, so all-consuming, that it physically hurt. I had never felt anything like it. I didn't know it was possible to love something this much. "Hi, James," I whispered, touching his impossibly small fingers. "Hi, baby. I'm your mom. I'm your mom." Tom stood beside the hospital bed, tears running down his face. "He's perfect, Linda. He's absolutely perfect." In that moment, everything else faded away. Law school, career ambitions, 5-year plans. None of it seemed as important as this tiny person depending on me. The first few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. James was colicky and cried for hours at a time. I walked the apartment with him at 3 in the morning, bouncing him gently, singing lullabies my mother used to sing to me, willing him to sleep. Tom helped when he could, but he was working long hours. We needed the money more than ever now. He picked up overtime shifts, came home exhausted, often fell asleep still in his work clothes. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Once James was a bit older, once he could go to daycare, I'd go back to my plan. I'd take the bar exam, I'd get a job, I'd still become a lawyer. But when James was 6 months old, and I started researching daycare options, I was horrified by the cost. Quality daycare in Boston was astronomically expensive, sometimes as much as Tom's entire paycheck, and the cheaper options. The facilities I could afford looked run down, understaffed. The thought of leaving my baby there for 8 or 9 hours a day made me physically ill. "Maybe I should wait a bit longer," I told Tom one night as we sat on the couch, James finally asleep in his bassinet. "Maybe until he's 2 or 3. Preschool is cheaper, and he'll be more independent by then." Tom looked conflicted. "Are you sure? I know how important your career is to you." "It is important," I said, "but he's more important. He needs me right now. The career can wait a couple of years." A couple of years turned into 5. Then 10, then 23. I stayed home with James, and I don't regret it. I really don't. I was there for every first words, first steps, first day of school. I was there when he skinned his knee learning to ride a bike. I was there to help with homework, to drive him to soccer practice, to make his lunch every morning and have dinner ready every evening. I was there. Tom worked constantly. He moved up from technician to supervisor, which meant more money but also more hours. Some weeks I barely saw him. He'd leave before James woke up and come home after James was asleep. I managed the household. I stretched every dollar. I clipped coupons, shopped sales, cooked everything from scratch. I made our small apartment a home. I volunteered at James's school, joined the PTA, became friends with the other mothers. But sometimes, late at night, after Tom and James were both asleep, I'd open the closet and pull out the box with my law books. I'd sit on the floor and flip through them, running my fingers over the highlighted passages, the notes I'd written in the margins in my younger handwriting. Sometimes I wondered who that girl was, the one who'd been so driven, so certain of her future. I felt like I was looking at a stranger. My diploma was in a drawer somewhere. I'd never framed it. What was the point? The years passed quickly, too quickly. James grew from a toddler to a child to a teenager. He was smart, kind, funny. Everything I could have hoped for in a son. Watching him grow up was the greatest joy of my life. But somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself. I was a wife, a mother. But who was Linda? Without those roles, Who was I? I didn't know anymore. When James turned 18 and left for college, a state school with a decent scholarship and loans we'd have to pay off for years, the apartment felt empty. Tom was still working long hours. I had days that stretched out endlessly with nothing to fill them. I got a part-time job at a local grocery store, just to have something to do, to feel useful. I stocked shelves and worked the register, and smiled at customers and felt my brain slowly atrophying. Then James graduated college and started his first job at a marketing firm. I was so proud. My boy, my baby, was making it. He was going to have the opportunities I never did. When he met Brianna at 23, I was happy for him. She was beautiful, confident, successful. She came from money, real money, and I thought maybe she'd be good for him. Maybe she'd open doors for him. But from the very beginning, Brianna made it clear that I didn't fit into her world. She never said it directly. It was subtler than that. She was always polite, always smiled, but there was a coldness underneath. She rarely came to our apartment. "Dorchester is so far," she'd say with a light laugh. When I invited them for dinner, she'd have a reason she couldn't come. "So sorry, Linda, but I have this work thing." Or, "We already have plans with my family." When they got engaged, I cried happy tears. At the wedding, though, I felt like an outsider. The ceremony was at an exclusive club in Brookline. The other guests were doctors, lawyers, business owners. I wore a dress from Macy's that I'd found on clearance and felt like everyone could tell. Brianna's mother had looked me up and down at the reception, her expression carefully neutral. "So nice to finally meet you," she'd said in a tone that suggested it wasn't nice at all. "James has told us so much about you." I doubted that. After the wedding, I saw James less and less. He was busy with married life, with work, with Brianna's social circle. Our weekly phone calls became monthly. Then every few months, his texts got shorter. "Busy. Talk later." I understood. He was building his own life. That's what you're supposed to do. But it hurt. God, it hurt. And then, one rainy April afternoon 6 months ago, everything changed. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling mindlessly through a job search website I'd bookmarked but rarely actually used. I wasn't even really looking, just procrastinating, avoiding the pile of laundry I needed to fold. And then I saw it. Harriman & Associates seeks head of legal department. Requirements, JD. From accredited institution, strong analytical skills, management experience preferred but not required. We value passion, dedication, and fresh perspectives. Non-traditional career paths welcomed. I read it 3 times. JD. I had that. I'd graduated from BU with my degree in legal studies. I'd never taken the bar exam, but this position didn't require bar admission. It was in-house corporate legal work, not litigation. Management experience preferred but not required. Non-traditional career paths welcomed. It was like the posting had been written specifically for me. I stared at it for a long time, my heart pounding. 23 years. I hadn't worked as a lawyer for 23 years. Who would hire me? Who would take a chance on a middle-aged woman who'd spent the last 2 decades as a stay-at-home mom? But something inside me, some spark I thought had died years ago, flickered to life. What if? What if I tried? What's the worst that could happen? They'd say no. I'd been living with no for 23 years. I updated my resume. It looked pathetically thin, but I filled it out honestly. My degree, my volunteer work at James's schools, the organizational skills I'd developed managing a household on a tight budget for 2 decades. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I hit submit. I didn't tell anyone, not Tom, not James. What was the point of getting their hopes up when nothing would probably come of it? But 2 weeks later, my phone rang. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Janet Chen from Harriman & Associates. We received your application for the head of legal department position, and we'd like to invite you for an initial interview." I almost dropped the phone. The interview process was grueling. There were 3 rounds. First, a phone screening. Then an in-person interview with the HR department. Then a panel interview with senior management, where they gave me hypothetical legal scenarios and asked how I'd handle them. I was terrified for all of them, but I was also more alive than I'd felt in years. For the panel interview, they gave me a case study, a complex employee dispute involving potential discrimination claims. I had 1 week to prepare a presentation on how I'd approach it. I spent that entire week buried in my old law textbooks, researching current employment law, reviewing case precedents. I barely slept. I filled notebook after notebook with notes. It was like being back in college, Except this time, the stakes felt even higher. When I gave my presentation, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pointer, but my voice was steady, and I knew my material inside and out. The panel asked tough questions. I answered them. When I didn't know something, I admitted it, but explained how I'd find the answer. At the end, the CEO, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Hoffman, looked at me over her reading glasses. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, "I'm going to be frank with you. When we first saw your resume, several people on the hiring committee were skeptical. 23 years out of the field is unusual, but your interview was exceptional. Your analysis of the case study was better than candidates with a decade of experience at major firms. You have something they don't: perspective, life experience, and a hunger to prove yourself that's frankly refreshing." She paused. "We'd like to offer you the position." I burst into tears right there in the conference room. Completely unprofessional, but I couldn't help it. 23 years of dormant dreams suddenly, impossibly, coming true. I started at Harriman & Associates in early October. The first day, I was so nervous I threw up in the parking lot before walking into the building, but I walked in. My team consisted of 6 lawyers, all younger than me, all with more practical experience. I was terrified they'd resent me, this outsider with no real track record, but I worked harder than anyone. I came in early, stayed late. I listened to them, learned from them, valued their expertise, and gradually, I earned their respect. They realized I might not have courtroom experience, but I knew legal theory better than anyone, and I cared. I really cared about doing the work right. One of my team members was Richard Whitmore. Richard was 52, with graying hair and kind eyes behind his glasses. He was methodical, thorough, never cut corners. We had coffee together in the break room several times a week, and he'd tell me about his life. He talked about his daughters sometimes, how he worried he hadn't raised them right, how he'd given them too much, too easily. "My youngest, Brianna," he said one October afternoon, stirring sugar into his coffee. "She's particularly challenging. Spoiled, if I'm being honest. We gave her everything, and now she thinks the world owes her something. She married a nice young man last year. Good kid, works in marketing. But I worry she doesn't appreciate him. Doesn't appreciate anything, really." I nodded sympathetically, having no idea that nice young man was my son. The weeks passed. I threw myself into my work. For the first time in over 2 decades, I felt like myself again. Like Linda Morrison, not just James's mom or Tom's wife, but Linda, a person with value beyond her relationships to other people. I still hadn't told James about the job. I wanted to be sure it would last first. Wanted to prove to myself I could really do this before I told anyone. And then, in mid-November, James called me. "Mom, great news. Brianna's family is finally having a family dinner and they really want you to come. They've been asking to meet you." My heart swelled. Finally, after 2 years, they wanted to include me. "That's wonderful, honey. When?" "This Friday. I'll text you the address. It's kind of fancy, so, dress nice." I promised I would. I went through my closet 3 times trying to find something appropriate. Everything looked shabby, outdated. I ended up wearing the same navy dress I'd worn to James's wedding, hoping it would be good enough. When the taxi dropped me off at the Whitmore mansion that Friday evening, when I saw the grandeur of it, I felt my old insecurities creeping back, but I pushed them down. I was a professional now. I was head of legal at a respected firm. I'd earned my place, but I still hadn't connected the dots. Whitmore was a common enough last name. Boston was a big city. It never occurred to me that Richard Whitmore, my colleague, and Brianna Whitmore, my daughter-in-law, were related. Not until that dinner. Not until Brianna introduced me as the broke freeloader we keep around out of pity. Not until Richard Whitmore looked at me across that table and said, "Aren't you my new boss?" The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. Every eye in that dining room was fixed on either Richard or me, trying to understand what was happening. Richard stood up from his chair slowly, his napkin falling from his lap to the floor. He adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit I'd noticed he had at work whenever he was processing something unexpected. "Linda?" he said, his voice uncertain. "Linda Morrison? From Harriman?" I found my voice, though it came out quieter than I intended. "Yes, Richard. It's me." Brianna's face had gone from flushed with laughter to completely white. The wine glass in her hand trembled slightly. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. I don't understand," Patricia Whitmore said, looking between her husband and me. "Richard, what are you talking about?" Richard was still staring at me, and now his expression was changing from confusion to something else, understanding, and maybe a bit of pride. "Patricia, everyone," he said, his voice getting stronger. "This is Linda Morrison. She's the new head of the legal department at Harriman and Associates. She started about 6 weeks ago. She's my boss," someone gasped. "One of the cousins, I think. She beat out over 40 other candidates for the position," Richard continued, and now he was fully in presentation mode. The same way he'd explain a complicated case to the team, some with 15, 20 years of experience at major Boston firms. The hiring committee was unanimous. She gave the best interview any of them had ever seen. James was standing now, too, looking between me and Brianna, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, definitely, but also something that might have been anger. "Mom," he said slowly, "you're working. As a lawyer? Since when?" "Since early October," I replied, finally finding my full voice. "About 6 weeks, like Richard said. Why didn't you tell me?" "That was a good question. A fair question. Because I wanted to be sure first," I said honestly. "I wanted to know if I could actually do it, if I could make it work. After so many years away from it, I wasn't sure." One of Brianna's uncles, a large man with a prominent nose and a gold watch, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, this is unexpected." Brianna finally found her voice. "Dad, that can't be right. Linda doesn't work. She's never worked. She just stays home. James told me." "I told you I stayed home to raise James," I interrupted. And there was an edge to my voice now, which is true. I did, for 23 years, but I'm also a Boston University graduate with a degree in legal studies. I chose to pause my career to be a full-time mother. That doesn't mean I was incapable of having a career. The distinction hung in the air. Richard nodded emphatically. "Linda has been exceptional. Truly exceptional. In her first month, she completely overhauled our compliance protocols, something the department had been struggling with for over a year. She identified gaps in our procedures that could have exposed the company to significant liability. She saved us from potential lawsuits that could have cost millions." He walked closer to where I sat, and I could see genuine admiration in his eyes. "She knows corporate law better than anyone I've worked with in my 20 years at Harriman. She's meticulous, analytical, and she has this way of seeing connections between different areas of law that others miss." Margaret Hoffman told me privately that hiring Linda was one of the best decisions the company has made in the last decade. Each word Richard spoke was like a nail in a coffin. I watched Brianna's face grow paler and paler, her carefully constructed narrative about me, the poor, helpless mother-in-law who needed their charity, was crumbling in real time. But Brianna said," Patricia began, then trailed off, looking at her daughter with confusion and dawning disappointment. James was still standing, but now he'd moved to stand beside my chair. He put his hand on my shoulder, and I could feel it trembling slightly. "Brianna," he said, and his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Did you know my mother graduated from Boston University? Did you know she has a law degree?" Brianna's eyes were fixed on her plate. She didn't answer. "Did you know," James continued, his voice getting harder, "that she put her entire career on hold to raise me? That she could have been a lawyer 23 years ago, but chose to stay home because she wanted to give me the best possible childhood?" Still silence from Brianna. "Did you know that she never, not once, asked me for money? That every bill in her apartment is paid with money she saved or earned herself? That the help you claim we give her is completely fictional?" Brianna's hands were shaking visibly now. She set down her wine glass carefully, as if afraid she might drop it. One of Brianna's aunts, a thin woman with severe features and expensive jewelry, spoke up. "Brianna, dear, this is very concerning. Why would you say such things about your mother-in-law?" Brianna's voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't know. I thought—" "You thought what?" James demanded. "That because she lives in Dorchester and doesn't wear designer clothes, she must be some kind of charity case? That because she chose to be a mother instead of working, she was less than you?" The silence that followed was excruciating. I could feel every eye on us, could sense the judgment in the room shifting from me to Brianna. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Richard, did you know about this? About how Brianna has been treating her mother-in-law?" "I had no idea," Richard said quietly. "If I had known, I would have intervened immediately. Linda has been nothing but professional and kind at work. The fact that she's been subjected to this treatment from our daughter is—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "It's unacceptable." I took a deep breath. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by something else. Not quite satisfaction. I took no joy in Brianna's humiliation, but maybe a sense of vindication, a sense of my own worth being publicly acknowledged after years of being made to feel less than. "Excuse me," I said quietly, standing up. "I need a moment. Could someone direct me to the restroom?" James immediately stood. "Mom, I'll come with you." "No, honey. I'm fine. I just need a minute alone. A server who'd been standing frozen by the wall throughout this entire exchange finally moved. I'll show you, ma'am. I followed her out of the dining room, acutely aware of the whispers that started the moment I left. The restroom was down a long hallway lined with more oil paintings and antique furniture. It was, predictably, more opulent than any bathroom I'd ever seen. Marble countertops, gold fixtures, fresh flowers in a crystal vase. I stood at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was flushed, my eyes bright with unshed tears. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, years of feeling inadequate, of feeling less than, of being made to feel like a burden. All of it was being rewritten in this single evening. I splashed cold water on my face, careful not to ruin what little makeup I wore. I took several deep breaths, trying to center myself. There was a soft knock on the door. "Linda?" It was Brianna's voice, small and uncertain. Can I come in, please?" I considered saying no, considered making her wait, making her suffer a bit more, but that wasn't who I was. "It's unlocked," I said. The door opened slowly. Brianna slipped in and closed it behind her. Her eyes were red and swollen. She'd been crying. Her perfect makeup was smudged. She looked younger suddenly, more vulnerable. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know about any of it." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "What exactly didn't you know, Brianna? That I have a degree? That I'm capable of working? Or just that I happen to be your father's boss?" She flinched at the sharpness in my voice. "All of it," she said. "I made assumptions, terrible assumptions. I saw where you lived, how you dressed, and I assumed you were—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Poor?" I supplied. "Unsuccessful? A failure?" "Yes," she whispered. And then the tears started flowing again. "God, I'm a horrible person. I'm exactly what my father thinks I am. Spoiled and shallow and cruel." I watched her cry, and despite everything, I felt a stirring of pity. She was young. She'd been raised in a bubble of wealth and privilege. She'd probably never had to truly struggle for anything in her life. "Why, Brianna?" I asked more gently. "Why do you hate me so much? What did I ever do to you?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara further. "I don't hate you. I never hated you. I was threatened by you." That surprised me. "Threatened? By me?" "Yes," she said miserably. "Because James loves you so much. He talks about you constantly. Did you know that? About how you made every school play, how you helped him with his homework every night, how you always made his favorite meals. And I barely see my parents. They were always working, always traveling, always busy. I was raised by nannies and housekeepers. And when I'd hear James talk about you, about this mother who gave up everything for him, I felt," she paused, struggling with the words, "jealous and inadequate. So I told myself you couldn't be that great, that there must be something wrong with you. That's why I made up those stories about giving you money, about you being dependent on us. It made me feel better somehow, made me feel less like a failure as a daughter and a wife." The confession hung in the air between us. It was more honest than I'd expected from her. "Brianna," I said slowly, "I'm not going to tell you it's okay, because it's not. What you did tonight was cruel. You humiliated me in front of your entire family. You made me feel small and worthless. That's not something I can just brush off." She nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry, and I'm going to spend however long it takes making this right." I studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity, but all I saw was genuine remorse. "Here's what I want you to understand," I said. "I'm not ashamed of the choices I made. Being a stay-at-home mother isn't less valuable than having a career. I raised a good man, a kind, compassionate man who treats people with respect. That's an achievement I'm proud of. But I also happen to have other talents, other ambitions. Women are allowed to be more than one thing." "I know that," Brianna said. "Or I should know that. I've never had to think about it. Everything has always been so easy for me." "Then maybe it's time to start thinking about it," I said. "And maybe it's time to start treating people with more kindness, regardless of what you think their circumstances are." She nodded vigorously. "I will. I promise I will." There was another knock on the door. "Mom?" James's voice. "Are you okay?" I opened the door. James stood there, his face etched with concern and anger. Behind him, Richard stood with his hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "I'm fine, honey," I said. James looked past me to Brianna, and his jaw tightened. "Brianna, we need to talk. Seriously talk." "I know," she said quietly. "I know we do." Richard stepped forward. "Linda, I want to apologize as well. As Brianna's father, I take responsibility for this. I clearly failed to teach her basic decency and respect. This reflects poorly on our entire family. Richard, I said, you've been nothing but kind and respectful to me at work. You're not responsible for your adult daughter's choices. Perhaps not directly, he said, but I am responsible for the values I did or didn't instill in her. Patricia and I gave our daughters everything they wanted materially, but we clearly neglected their character development. He looked at Brianna with disappointment. That's on us. We all stood there in the hallway, an awkward tableau of shame and apology and lingering tension. I said carefully, I should probably go home. No, James said immediately. No, Mom. You're not leaving. Brianna is going to apologize to everyone, and we're going to have dinner, and you're going to be treated with the respect you deserve. This is important. I started to protest, but Richard nodded in agreement. James is right. You shouldn't leave. What happened in there was wrong, and it needs to be corrected publicly. Brianna took a shaky breath. Linda, would you give me a chance to apologize properly to everyone? I looked at her tear-stained face, at James's determined expression, at Richard's guilty one, and I thought about all those years I'd spent feeling less than, all those times I doubted my own worth. All right, I said. Let's go back. We walked back to the dining room together, a strange procession of 3 generations trying to navigate the aftermath of exposed lies. I could hear the low murmur of conversation before we even entered the room. Everyone was talking at once, probably dissecting what had just happened, forming their opinions and judgments. The conversation stopped abruptly when we appeared in the doorway. Brianna walked to the center of the room, near her seat at the table. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and she looked down at them as she spoke. Everyone, she began, her voice wavering. I need to apologize to all of you, but especially to Linda. She finally looked up, first at me, then around the table at her family and friends. Everything I said earlier about Linda was wrong. Completely wrong. She doesn't depend on us financially. We've never given her money. She doesn't need our help. Those were lies I told because she paused, seeming to struggle with the next words. Because I was insecure, because I was jealous of the relationship she has with James, and because I made assumptions about her based on superficial things like where she lives and what she wears. The room was completely silent. Patricia had her hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. Some of the cousins were looking down at their plates, uncomfortable witnesses to this family drama. The truth is, Brianna continued, Linda is an accomplished woman. She has a law degree from Boston University. She's currently the head of legal at Harriman and Associates, my father's boss. She chose to put her career on hold for over 20 years to raise James, and that was a sacrifice I didn't understand or appreciate. Instead of respecting her, I diminished her. I made her feel small, and that's unforgivable. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Linda, I know sorry isn't enough. I know I humiliated you in front of my family, but I want you to know that I'm genuinely sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I hurt you, and because I've been a terrible daughter-in-law. She sat down abruptly, as if her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. The silence stretched on for several seconds. Then Patricia stood up. She walked over to me, and to my surprise, she took my hands in hers. Linda, I'm so ashamed, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Ashamed of my daughter's behavior, and ashamed that we've never truly welcomed you into this family the way you deserved. Richard told me you've been nothing but gracious and professional at work, despite having no idea of the connection between you. That speaks to your character. I hope you'll give us a chance to make this right. Thank you, Patricia, I said softly. I appreciate that. One of Brianna's uncles stood up next. I think we all owe Linda an apology for laughing. That was wrong. We should have questioned what Brianna was saying instead of just going along with it. There were murmurs of agreement around the table. Several people nodded. A few of the women looked genuinely contrite. James had been standing silently near the door, but now he walked to the table and stood beside my chair. I want to say something too, he announced. His voice was steady, but I could hear the anger underneath. I've been a terrible son. I knew Brianna didn't make much effort with my mom, and I should have pushed back harder. I should have insisted she be included more. I should have stood up for her. He looked at me with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. Mom, you gave up everything for me. You were at every soccer game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. You helped me with my homework even when you were exhausted. You made me lunch every single day and always included a little note telling me you loved me. You taught me how to be a good person. His voice cracked. And in return, I let my wife disrespect you. I let her exclude you from our lives. I didn't even know you'd gotten a job. A job you clearly worked incredibly hard for. That's on me. And I'm so sorry. I stood up and pulled him into a hug. He was taller than me now, but in that moment, he felt like my little boy again. You didn't let anyone do anything. I whispered in his ear. You're not responsible for Brianna's choices, and you're not a terrible son. You're my son, and I love you. He hugged me tighter. Richard cleared his throat. I think we should start dinner over. Properly this time. Linda, would you do us the honor of sitting at the head of the table next to me? It was a symbolic gesture, and everyone in the room knew it, moving me from my place in the middle to a position of respect and prominence. That's very kind, I said, but I'm fine where I am. Please, Richard insisted. I'd like to hear more about your work at Harriman. I'm curious about your perspective on some of the cases we're handling. And so dinner resumed. But the entire dynamic had shifted. People who had barely acknowledged me earlier now asked me questions about my background, my education, my career. They wanted to know about James's childhood, about what it was like going back to work after so many years. Richard and I ended up in a deep conversation about a particularly complicated merger case Harriman was advising on. I offered some thoughts on potential regulatory issues, and he pulled out his phone to take notes. You know, he said at one point, you should consider taking the bar exam. With your knowledge and skills, you'd pass easily, and it would open up even more opportunities for you. The idea sent a little thrill through me. I'm 46, I said. Isn't that a bit old to be taking the bar? Nonsense, Richard replied firmly. I know attorneys who pass the bar in their 50s, their 60s even. Age is irrelevant. Capability is what matters. Patricia, who had been listening, leaned over. Linda, I want to apologize again for our family's behavior, but I also want to say how impressed I am. Returning to your field after 23 years, that takes courage most people don't have. Thank you, I said. It was terrifying, if I'm being honest. I wasn't sure I could still do it. But you did, she said warmly. And from what Richard tells me, you're excelling. That's remarkable. Across the table, I noticed Brianna watching me. When our eyes met, she gave me a small, tentative smile. It wasn't much, but it was genuine. I nodded back, not quite ready to fully forgive, but willing to acknowledge her attempt. As dinner wound down and dessert was served, some elaborate chocolate creation that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, several people came up to speak with me privately. They apologized for laughing. They said they'd love to hear more about my career. One of Brianna's cousins, a young woman in her late 20s, pulled me aside. I just wanted to say that what you did is really inspiring, she said earnestly. I've been thinking about going back to school, but I keep telling myself I'm too old, that I've missed my chance. But you proved that's not true. You're never too old to pursue your dreams, I told her. It's scary, yes, but it's worth it. As the evening finally came to an end, people started gathering their coats and saying their goodbyes. James insisted on driving me home, though I assured him I could take a taxi. Before we left, Brianna approached me one more time. Linda, she said hesitantly, I know I don't deserve this, but would you be willing to have coffee with me sometime? I'd really like to learn from you. About law, about being strong, about being a better person. I studied her face. The arrogance from earlier in the evening was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. All right, I said. Coffee. But Brianna, I need you to understand something. You can't just apologize and expect everything to be fine. Trust is earned. Respect is earned. It's going to take time. I know, she said quickly. I know, and I'm willing to put in that time. I want to be better. I need to be better. Then we'll see, I said. Richard walked me to the door, James following behind. Linda, Richard said, I meant what I said about the bar exam. Think about it. You have too much potential to limit yourself. And if you decide to pursue it, I'd be happy to help you study. I still have all my old materials. That's very generous, Richard. Thank you, he smiled. It's the least I can do, given the circumstances. And Linda, I'm proud to have you as my boss. Truly proud. The drive home was quiet at first. James seemed lost in thought, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Mom, he finally said as we got on the highway, I'm going to make changes. Real changes. Brianna and I are going to have some serious conversations about respect and priorities. And I'm going to make sure you're part of our lives, really part of it. Not just an occasional visit. James, I don't want to cause problems in your marriage. You're not causing anything, he interrupted firmly. Brianna caused this, and she needs to fix it. But I need to fix my part too. I should have been more attentive, should have made more effort. We pulled up in front of my apartment building. The contrast between where I'd just been and where I lived was stark. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of it. Do you want to come up? I asked. I could make tea. I'd like that, he said. We climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. The building was old, the carpeting worn, But it was clean, and it was home. I unlocked the door and flipped on the lights. James looked around the small living room as if seeing it for the first time. "It's smaller than I remembered," he said quietly. "You haven't been here in almost a year." I pointed out gently. He winced. "Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, Mom. Stop apologizing," I said, moving to the kitchen to put the kettle on. "You're here now." He followed me into the tiny kitchen. "Tell me about your job. Tell me everything. Why didn't you tell me you were applying?" So I did. I told him about seeing the posting, about the interview process, about my first terrifying day. I told him about Richard and the rest of the team, about the compliance project, about how it felt to use my brain in that way again after so many years. He listened intently, asking questions, genuinely engaged, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were really connecting, not just mother and son, but two adults having a real conversation. "I'm so proud of you," he said when I finished. "I can't believe you did all this and didn't tell anyone. Weren't you scared?" "Terrified," I admitted, "every single day, but also exhilarated. It reminded me who I used to be before I became just mom. Not that being your mom isn't important. I know what you mean," he said. "You're allowed to be more than one thing." I smiled. "That's what I tried to tell Brianna tonight." We talked for another hour, drinking tea and eating cookies I'd baked earlier that week. He told me about his work, about his frustrations and his goals. He told me honestly about his relationship with Brianna, about the ways he knew it needed to improve. When he finally left after midnight, he hugged me tightly at the door. "I love you, Mom. And I'm going to do better, I promise." After he left, I stood in my quiet apartment, processing everything that had happened. The humiliation, the revelation, the apologies, the shift in how people saw me. I walked to the closet and pulled out the box with my law books, but this time, I didn't feel sad looking at them. I felt energized. I pulled out my diploma from the drawer where it had lived for over 20 years. The glass was dusty, the frame cheap plastic, but the words on it were still clear. Linda Marie Morrison, Bachelor of Arts in Legal Studies, Boston University, 2002. I cleaned the glass carefully with a cloth, and then, for the first time ever, I hung it on the wall in my living room, right above the small desk where I now did work in the evenings. It looked right there, like it belonged. Like I belonged. The Monday after the dinner, I arrived at work early as usual. I'd barely slept the weekend, my mind replaying the events of Friday night over and over. Part of me worried that things would be awkward with Richard, that the professional boundary between us had been irreparably damaged by the personal drama. But when I walked into the office, Richard was already there, coffee in hand, and he greeted me with his usual warm smile. "Good morning, Linda. Coffee? Please," I said gratefully. We sat in the small break room, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then Richard set down his cup and looked at me directly. "I want to address Friday night," he said. "Not as your subordinate, but as Brianna's father. What happened was inexcusable. And Patricia and I spent the entire weekend talking about where we went wrong in raising our daughters. We gave them everything except the tools to be decent human beings. That's on us." "Richard," I said gently, "Brianna is an adult. She makes her own choices." "True," he acknowledged, "but parents shape those choices in ways we don't always realize. Anyway, I wanted to assure you that our working relationship doesn't have to change because of this. You're still my boss, and a damn good one. I respect you professionally. And now I respect you even more personally." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I appreciate that. And for what it's worth, you've been nothing but professional and kind since I started. Whatever Brianna's issues are, they're not a reflection on you." He smiled, relieved. "Shall we get to work then? We have that Peterson case to review this morning." And just like that, we moved forward. The professional relationship remained intact, maybe even strengthened by our mutual respect. Later that week, on Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Brianna. "Would you be free for coffee Saturday morning? I understand if you'd rather not." I stared at the text for a long moment before responding. "Saturday at 10. There's a cafe called Morning Brew on Center Street in Dorchester." I chose deliberately. If Brianna wanted to learn from me, she could start by coming to my neighborhood instead of expecting me to go to hers. Her response came quickly. "Perfect. I'll be there. Thank you." Saturday morning arrived cold and gray, typical for late November in Boston. I got to Morning Brew 15 minutes early and ordered my usual coffee. The cafe was a small local place, nothing fancy, but it had good coffee and friendly staff. I'd been coming here for years. Brianna arrived exactly at 10, and I had to admit I was impressed she was on time. She was dressed more casually than I'd ever seen her. Jeans, a simple sweater, minimal makeup. She looked nervous. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she sat down across from me. "I said I would," I replied neutrally. She ordered a latte, and we sat in awkward silence until it arrived. Then she took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking this week," she began, "about why I acted the way I did. And I realized something. I've never actually worked for anything in my life. Not really. I got into college because my parents donated a building. I got my job because my dad knew someone. I married James because he was kind and patient with me, not because I deserved someone like him." She wrapped her hands around her latte cup. "When I met you and saw that you lived simply, that you didn't have a lot of material things, I made a judgment. I assumed you were less successful, less capable, less valuable than me, and that made me feel better about myself, because if you were less, then I was more. That's honest," I said. "But it was wrong," she continued, "so wrong, because you accomplished something I've never done and probably never will. You raised an amazing person. James is kind, hardworking, empathetic. That's because of you. And on top of that, you went back and built a career from scratch in your 40s. You did something hard, something scary, and you succeeded. I've never done anything hard in my entire life." I sipped my coffee, letting her continue. "I want to learn from you," she said. "Not just about law, although I am interested in that, but about being strong, about having real courage, about earning respect instead of just expecting it." "That's a big ask," I said carefully. "I know," she said quickly, "and I know I don't deserve your time or your guidance, but I'm asking anyway because I want to be better. I need to be better, not just for James, but for myself." I studied her face. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something raw and uncertain, like a person who'd just realized they didn't know themselves as well as they thought. "All right," I said finally. "Here's what I'll offer. We can meet for coffee occasionally. You can ask me questions. But Brianna, I'm not going to coddle you. If you want to learn about being strong, you need to do hard things, real things." "Like what?" she asked. "Like getting a job you're not qualified for and working your ass off to prove you deserve it," I said bluntly. "Like sacrificing something you want for something more important, like apologizing when you're wrong and meaning it, like doing the right thing even when it's uncomfortable." She nodded slowly. "That's fair." And I continued, "You need to fix things with James. Really fix them. He loves you, but he's hurt by how you've treated me. That's not something you can just apologize away." "I know," she said quietly. "We've been talking a lot this week. Really talking. For the first time in our marriage, maybe. He told me he's been unhappy for a while, that he feels like I don't respect him or his background, that I make him feel like he's not good enough." She blinked back tears. "I didn't realize I was doing that. But he's right. I did make him feel that way, and I'm trying to fix it, but I don't know if he's going to forgive me." "He will," I said with certainty. "James has a big heart, but you have to give him time. And you have to show him through your actions that you're really changing. Words aren't enough." "I understand," she said. We talked for another hour. I told her about my years as a stay-at-home mom, about the challenges and the joys. I told her about the loneliness sometimes, the way I'd lost touch with friends, the way I'd sometimes felt invisible. But I also told her about the moments that made it worthwhile. James's first words, his first day of kindergarten, the way he'd run to me after school bursting with stories about his day. She listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. When we finally parted ways, she hugged me. A real hug, not the awkward, obligatory ones from before. "Thank you," she said. "Really. Thank you for giving me a chance." "Don't waste it," I replied. Over the next few months, Brianna and I met regularly. Sometimes weekly, sometimes every other week, depending on our schedules. I watched her slowly, genuinely try to become a better person. She volunteered at a women's shelter, working with women who'd escaped domestic violence and were trying to rebuild their lives. It was uncomfortable for her at first. She told me she didn't know what to say, felt useless. But she kept going back, kept learning, kept trying to help. She started taking online courses in nonprofit management, talking about maybe working for a charitable organization instead of the boutique marketing firm her father had gotten her into. She and James went to couples counseling. There were rough patches. James told me about arguments they'd had, about times he'd almost given up, but they both kept working at it, and slowly, I saw changes in their relationship. James started smiling more when he talked about her. They started visiting me together, and I could see genuine affection between them. Brianna was softer somehow, less defensive, more open. At work, things were going well too. I'd been at Harriman for 6 months, and Margaret Hoffman called me into her office one afternoon in early spring. "Linda, I wanted to discuss your future with the company," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "You've exceeded every expectation we had. The legal department is running more efficiently than it has in years. You've saved us from several potential lawsuits. Your team respects you. Clients specifically ask for you when they have complex issues." "Thank you," I said, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. I love the work. I'm glad to hear that, Margaret said, because I'd like to offer you a promotion. Senior VP of Legal Affairs. It comes with a substantial salary increase and additional responsibilities. You'd be overseeing not just our legal department, but coordinating with our risk management and compliance teams across all divisions. I was stunned. A promotion. Already. I don't know what to say, I admitted. Say yes, Margaret said with a smile. You've earned it. Then yes, I said, feeling tears prick my eyes. Yes, absolutely. That evening, I called James to tell him. He was thrilled, insisting on taking me out to dinner to celebrate. When I mentioned it to Richard at work the next day, he beamed with pride. That's fantastic, he said. Well deserved, though I have to admit, it's a bit strange that my boss's boss is now my son's mother-in-law. We both laughed at the absurdity of it. Life is weird, I said. Indeed it is, he agreed. In May, about 6 months after the infamous dinner, Patricia called me. Linda, I'd like to invite you to a Mother's Day brunch at our house, she said. Just family. I know things started off poorly between our families, but I'm hoping we can build something better going forward. I'd like that, I said honestly. The Mother's Day brunch was completely different from that first dinner. The same house, the same dining room, but the atmosphere was transformed. Patricia greeted me with a genuine hug. Richard was warm and welcoming. Even Brianna's sister, who I'd barely spoken to before, made an effort to chat with me. And Brianna, she'd helped cook the meal, Patricia told me proudly. She's been learning, Patricia said. Says she wants to be more than just someone who knows how to spend money. After brunch, Brianna pulled me aside. I have something for you, she said, handing me a wrapped box. I opened it carefully. Inside was a beautiful leather portfolio, the kind lawyers use to carry important documents. It was expensive, clearly high quality. Embossed on the front in gold lettering were the words, Linda Morrison, J.D. I know it doesn't make up for anything, Brianna said quickly, but I wanted you to have something that reflects who you are, who you've always been, even when people like me couldn't see it. I ran my fingers over the smooth leather, over my name and title. It's beautiful, I said, my voice thick. Thank you, Brianna. No, she said quietly. Thank you for not giving up on me, for giving me a chance to be better. We hugged, and this time it felt natural, real. James watched from across the room, and when I caught his eye, he smiled. That beautiful smile that had always melted my heart. He looked happy, genuinely happy. As the months continued to pass, life settled into a new rhythm. I threw myself into my work, energized by the promotion and the new challenges it brought. I started studying for the bar exam in my spare time, using the materials Richard had lent me. It was hard. The exam had changed significantly since my law school days, and there was so much to relearn, but I loved it. Every late night studying, every practice test, every moment of struggle, because I was doing it for me, not for anyone else. Just for me. In July, on a sweltering hot day, I sat for the Massachusetts bar exam. It was a grueling 2 days of testing. I walked out exhausted, unsure if I'd passed, but proud that I'd tried. The results came in October. I was at work when the email arrived. I stared at the subject line for a full minute before opening it, too afraid to look. Finally, I clicked. Congratulations. You have passed the Massachusetts bar examination. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Richard heard me from his office and came running. Linda, are you okay? I turned my computer screen toward him, unable to speak. His face broke into a huge grin. You passed! Linda, you passed the bar. Within minutes, the whole office knew. Margaret came down from the executive floor personally to congratulate me. My team brought champagne. It was a celebration unlike anything I'd experienced. That night, James and Brianna took me out to dinner at a nice restaurant in the North End. Tom came too. We'd been divorced for 2 years by then. An amicable split once James was grown, and we'd both admitted we'd grown apart. But we were friendly, and he'd been supportive of my career change. To Mom, James said, raising his glass, who proved it's never too late to chase your dreams. To Linda, Brianna added, who taught me what real strength looks like. To me, I said with a laugh, for finally figuring out who I am. We clinked glasses, and I looked around the table at these people who loved me, who saw me, who respected me. And I thought about that dinner almost a year ago, when I'd sat in the Whitmore mansion feeling small and worthless, how far I'd come, how much had changed, not just in my career, but in how I saw myself. I wasn't just James's mom anymore. I wasn't just someone's ex-wife. I was Linda Morrison, attorney at law, senior VP of legal affairs, a woman who'd built a career from nothing in her mid-40s. I was proud of the mother I'd been, but I was also proud of the woman I'd become. A few weeks later, on a crisp November Saturday morning, almost exactly a year after the infamous dinner, Brianna and I met for our weekly coffee. It had become a tradition, one I actually looked forward to now. "I have news," she said, her eyes sparkling. "I got accepted into a master's program in social work. I start in January." "Brianna, that's wonderful," I said, genuinely thrilled. "I know it means I'll have to quit my job at the marketing firm," she said, "and it's going to be hard, really hard, but I think it's what I'm meant to do. Working at the women's shelter showed me that. I want to help people, really help them." "I'm so proud of you," I said, and I meant it. "I learned it from you," she said, "that it's never too late to start over. That sacrifice is worth it when you're working towards something meaningful." We talked for a while about her plans, about the program, about her fears and excitement, and then she said something that surprised me. "Linda, I want to ask you something. And it's okay if you say no." "What is it?" "Would you be willing to write me a letter of recommendation for the program? They want letters from people who can speak to character and personal growth, and I can't think of anyone whose opinion I value more than yours." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "I'd be honored," I said. "Really?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Really," I confirmed. "You've worked hard to change, Brianna. You've earned it." That afternoon, I went home and wrote the letter. I wrote about the young woman I'd first met, spoiled and arrogant and cruel. And then I wrote about the woman she'd become, humble, hardworking, genuinely committed to making a difference. I wrote about transformation, about courage, about the strength it takes to admit you were wrong and work to be better. It was one of the easiest letters I'd ever written, because it was completely true. A few days later, I received an email from Richard. The subject line simply said, "Thank you." "Linda?" the email read. "Patricia and I had dinner with James and Brianna last night. We were talking about the changes in Brianna over the past year, about how much she's grown. James said something I keep thinking about. He said, Brianna had every advantage growing up. Money, connections, opportunities. But she didn't really learn what strength was until she met someone who'd actually earned everything she had. Someone who'd sacrificed and struggled and still came out compassionate and dignified. She learned it from my mom. I wanted you to know that. Wanted you to know that the positive influence you've had on my daughter, on my whole family, really, is something we'll be grateful for forever. You didn't have to give Brianna a chance. After how she treated you, you would have been justified in cutting her out completely, but you gave her grace. You gave her an opportunity to be better. That's the mark of a truly good person. Thank you, Linda, for everything." Richard. I read the email 3 times, crying a little more each time. Not sad tears, happy tears, grateful tears. Because a year ago, I'd sat in a dining room and been called a broke freeloader. I'd been humiliated and diminished, but that humiliation had cracked something open in me. It had forced me to confront who I was and who I wanted to be. It had pushed me to reclaim the parts of myself I'd set aside for so many years. And now here I was, 47 years old, a lawyer, a mentor, a woman who'd rebuilt her life from the ground up and come out stronger for it. On the anniversary of that dinner, the exact day, November 15th, James called me. "Hey, Mom, I know this might be weird, but Brianna and I were talking, and we want to have a do-over. A dinner at their house. Just us and Brianna's parents. A chance to celebrate how far we've all come in a year. Would you be willing?" I smiled. "I'd love that, honey." That Friday, I drove to Brookline. The house looked the same, imposing, beautiful, intimidating. But this time, when I walked up to the door, I didn't feel small. I felt proud. Brianna opened the door, and she was smiling. A real, genuine smile. "Linda, come in, come in. I made dinner myself. Well, with a lot of help from YouTube tutorials. But still, the dining room was set beautifully, but more simply than before. No crystal chandelier. They'd replaced it with something more modern and understated. The place settings were elegant, but not ostentatious. Patricia greeted me with a warm hug. Richard shook my hand formally, then laughed and hugged me too. "It's strange," he said, "when your boss becomes family." "Strange, but nice," I said. We sat down to dinner. Pasta primavera, salad, bread that Brianna admitted she'd burned the first time and had to remake. The conversation flowed easily. We talked about work, about Brianna's grad school plans, about James's recent promotion at his firm. At one point, Patricia raised her glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she said. "To Linda. A year ago, we treated you terribly. We made assumptions. We were cruel. We failed to see your worth. But you handled it with more grace and dignity than we deserved. You've since become not just a colleague to Richard, not just a mother-in-law to Brianna, but a friend to our family. You've taught us, taught me specifically, about real strength, about sacrifice, about character. So thank you. Thank you for giving us a second chance. To Linda, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. I felt my eyes getting misty again. Thank you, I said softly. All of you. This year has been transformative for me too. I rediscovered parts of myself I thought were lost forever, and I learned that it's never too late to start over. James reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm so proud of you, Mom. You're my hero. You always have been. But now the rest of the world gets to know it too. After dinner, Brianna asked if she could speak to me privately. We went out to the back patio, where the November air was crisp and cold but refreshing. I wanted to give you something, she said, pulling out an envelope. Don't open it now. Open it when you get home. Brianna, you don't have to give me anything. I know, she said, but I want to. Please. I took the envelope and slipped it into my purse. We talked for a while about her grad school applications, about her volunteer work, about her hopes for the future, and I realized that somewhere along the way, I genuinely started to care about this young woman, not just because she was married to my son, but because she'd worked so hard to become someone worth caring about. When I finally left that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years, maybe decades. At home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my couch, the same couch I'd had for 15 years. Worn but comfortable. I pulled out the envelope Brianna had given me. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Linda, I've tried to write this letter a dozen times, and I keep starting over because nothing feels adequate. How do you thank someone for saving your life? Because that's what you did. You saved me from becoming a person I would have hated, a person who was cruel and shallow and empty. A year ago, I humiliated you in front of my family. I called you terrible things. I made you feel worthless, and you would have been completely justified in never speaking to me again. But instead, you gave me grace. You gave me a chance. You showed me what real strength looks like. Not money or status or power, but character, integrity, the courage to be kind even when you've been hurt. You taught me that it's never too late to change, that we can choose every single day to be better than we were yesterday. I'm not perfect. I still make mistakes, but I'm trying every day to be the kind of person you'd be proud to know, the kind of person James deserves, the kind of person I want to be. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing me what it means to be a truly strong woman. With love and gratitude, Brianna P.S. James and I have been talking about starting a family. When we do, I hope our daughter grows up to be like you, and I hope you'll teach her all the things you've taught me. I set the letter down and let myself cry. Not sad tears, not even happy tears exactly, just tears of release, of closure, of gratitude. A year ago, I'd been called a broke freeloader. Today, I was an attorney, a senior VP, a mentor, a woman who'd reclaimed her identity and her dreams. But more than that, I was someone who'd chosen grace over bitterness, forgiveness over resentment, growth over stagnation. I looked at the diploma hanging on my wall, at the leather portfolio Brianna had given me sitting on my desk, at the bar exam results I'd printed and framed. These were symbols of achievement. Yes, but they were also symbols of something more important, of resilience, of courage, of the refusal to let anyone else define my worth. I picked up my phone and texted James, I love you, sweetheart. Thank you for always believing in me. His response came quickly, always, Mom. You're the strongest person I know. I set the phone down and looked around my small apartment. It wasn't a mansion. It would never be a mansion. But it was mine, earned through my own work, filled with my own accomplishments. And that was enough, more than enough, because in the end, this story wasn't about a dramatic confrontation or a satisfying moment of revenge. It was about something quieter, but more profound. It was about a woman who'd lost herself for a while, who'd been diminished and dismissed, who'd been made to feel less than, and it was about that same woman finding herself again, reclaiming her power, rebuilding her life, proving that it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. That night, I slept better than I had in years, and when I woke up the next morning, I looked in the mirror and smiled at what I saw. Not just a mother, not just an ex-wife, not just a lawyer or a VP or any single role, but Linda Morrison, a complete, complex, accomplished person who'd earned every ounce of respect she commanded. A woman who'd survived humiliation and emerged stronger. A woman who'd chosen grace. A woman who'd never, ever let anyone make her feel small again. And no one, absolutely no one, could take that away from me. 2 years later, I was sitting in my new office at Harriman & Associates, a corner office on the top floor with windows overlooking Boston Harbor. I'd been promoted again, this time to general counsel. the highest legal position in the company. On my desk was a photo of James and Brianna with their 6-month-old daughter, Emma. Brianna had asked if they could give her the middle name Linda. I'd cried when she told me. There was also a framed photo from Brianna's graduate school graduation, where I'd been her guest of honor, and another from the day I'd been sworn in as a member of the Massachusetts Bar, James and Tom both standing beside me, beaming with pride. My phone rang. It was Margaret Hoffman. "Linda, do you have a moment? There's a young woman downstairs asking to speak with you. Says she saw an article about you in Boston Magazine, the profile they did about women who restarted their careers after 40. She wants advice." I smiled. The article had come out last month. I'd been reluctant to do the interview, but Margaret had convinced me it would be good for the company. Since then, I'd gotten at least a dozen calls and emails from women in similar situations. Women who'd put their careers on hold and were wondering if it was too late to go back. "Send her up," I said. 5 minutes later, a woman in her early 50s entered my office. She looked nervous, clutching her purse tightly. "Mrs. Morrison? I'm Sarah Chen. I'm sorry to drop in like this, but I read your story and I had to meet you. Please call me Linda. And sit down. Tell me about yourself." She sat, and the words came tumbling out. She'd been a teacher before having kids. Spent 20 years as a stay-at-home mom. Her youngest had just left for college, and she felt lost, empty, like she didn't know who she was anymore without her identity as a mother. I listened, seeing myself in every word she said. "The thing is," Sarah said, her voice breaking, "I'm 52 years old. Everyone tells me it's too late, that I should just, I don't know, take up gardening or something. But I don't want to garden. I want to teach again. I want to matter again." I leaned forward, looking her directly in the eyes. "Sarah, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to really hear me. It is never too late. Never. I went back to work at 46. I passed the bar exam at 47. I've been promoted twice since then. Age is just a number. What matters is passion, determination, and the courage to try." Her eyes filled with tears. "Really? You really think I could do it?" "I don't think," I said firmly. "I know. The question isn't whether you can. The question is whether you will." We talked for an hour. I gave her advice on updating her credentials, on how to address the gap in her resume, on how to handle the fear and self-doubt. I gave her the names of contacts in the education field. I offered to review her resume when she had it ready. When she left, she hugged me. "Thank you," she whispered. "You gave me hope." After she left, I stood at my window, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there were hundreds, maybe thousands of women like Sarah, like I had been. Women who'd put their dreams on hold for their families, and now wondered if it was too late to dream again. I made a decision in that moment. I'd start speaking publicly about my experience, maybe write a book, maybe start a program to help women re-enter the workforce after extended absences. I had a platform now, and I was going to use it. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Date night with Brianna tonight. Mom, can you watch Emma? Know you're busy, but..." I smiled and typed back, "Of course. My place at 6? You're the best, Mom." I looked at the photo of Emma on my desk. That little girl would grow up seeing her grandmother as more than just grandma. She'd see a successful attorney, a leader, a woman who'd fought for her place in the world. She'd learn that women can be many things at once: mother, professional, mentor, friend. That sacrifice doesn't mean erasure, that it's never too late to reclaim yourself. She'd learn that strength isn't about being loud or aggressive or dominating others. Real strength is choosing grace when you've been wronged. It's building yourself back up when life tears you down. It's refusing to let anyone else define your worth. These were the lessons I'd learned the hard way, but they were lessons I'd make sure Emma learned from the beginning. My computer chimed with an email. It was from Richard. "Linda, just wanted to let you know that Brianna got accepted into her dream PhD program. She called me crying happy tears, said none of it would have been possible without you. Patricia and I couldn't agree more. Thank you for seeing the good in our daughter when we'd almost given up on her." I typed a quick response. "She did the work, Richard. I just showed her the way." But as I hit send, I thought about that dinner 3 years ago, about sitting in that dining room, being called a broke freeloader, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. If you'd told me then that within 3 years, I'd be general counsel of a major firm, that I'd have passed the bar exam, that I'd have a relationship with my daughter-in-law that was genuine and meaningful, I wouldn't have believed you. But here I was, living proof that our worst moments don't have to define us. That humiliation can be a catalyst for transformation, that it's never, ever too late to become who you were always meant to be. I looked at my reflection in the window, at the successful woman in the professional suit with her name on the door. and I hardly recognized the scared, diminished person I'd been just a few years ago. But she was still in there somewhere, and I was grateful to her. Grateful for the years she'd spent sacrificing her dreams to raise a good man. Grateful for the strength she'd built during those quiet, unacknowledged years. Grateful for the grace she'd shown when she could have chosen bitterness. That woman had made me who I was today, and I would spend the rest of my life making sure she was proud of what I'd become, because this was never really a story about revenge. It was a story about rediscovery, about reclaiming yourself after years of being invisible, about proving that mothers aren't just mothers. They're complete, complex human beings with talents and dreams and worth that extends far beyond their relationships to others. And it was about choosing to be gracious, even when you've been hurt, because that's the real power, not in making others feel small, but in refusing to become small yourself. No one gets to define my worth but me, and I am worthy. I have always been worthy, even when I couldn't see it. Even when others refused to see it, I was always worthy.